Okay, y'all just had lunch. You got full tummies. You stay awake on me now. All right? Okay, we're on page 21 in the workbook. There's some places to take notes, some fill in the blanks. In this session, we will be looking at loving the people with whom we might be sharing our faith. We will first be looking at the importance of knowing the context of those that we're building relationships with. And then we'll look at the idea of truly loving these people with whom we hope to share the gospel. Now, you're going to see some overlap between this session and the previous two sessions. There's just going to be overlap because it's like there's some important concepts to repeat here. Okay, so let's look at the context we're operating in. In the context of our own little local personal community that needs the news of a God who loves them. Context is vital. Anytime you walk into a room or any social setting, the context of that room will present certain protocols, certain taboos, ways to speak, when not to speak. And if we don't consider the context that we're in the middle of, we can be like a bull in a china shop, right? We got to consider context. So fill in the blank. It is of primary importance to know our context. It is important to know our audience. Now, in any arena of life, the effective communicator makes it a point to know their audience, to put in the mental effort to discern and learn where your listener is coming from, what their preconceptions are, what life experiences may have shaped the way that they see the world, and most likely will shape how they hear what comes out of our mouths. That is knowing their context. Now, when my kids were in middle school and high school, I was involved in coaching youth debate. And we encouraged the students that at the beginning of their round, when they walk into the room, we encouraged them to ask a few questions about their judges. They asked the judge to tell them a few things about themselves, so that when they launched into their persuasive arguments in the debate, they would have a little more to work with in terms of the context of the judge's perceptions, how they would receive the information, and the student debater could make adaptations to be heard more effectively. Our audience that we're talking about today are those around us that don't yet have a relationship with God. And understanding their context in life is vital to how we approach sharing the gospel with them. That was one of those trick questions about sharing. There's one way, but there's many ways, because we need to do it according to context. Yes, we're all made in God's image. That's our common denominator with every human being. And yes, the good news we want to share is for everyone, as we all share the same predicament of separation from God because of our sin. But we need to make sure that we do not underestimate cultural differences. In the modern Western world, a lot has changed about perceptions around faith, as well as how we approach conversations around faith. We are in a secular post-Christian age. So we cannot make assumptions about what people might know that we perhaps could make a couple decades ago. It's important that we understand this cultural shift so that we can adapt and contextualize our approach to sharing our faith. So to contextualize, fill in the blank, means to put into context. Contextualization attempts to communicate the gospel in word and deed in ways that make sense to people within their local cultural context, presenting Christianity in such a way that it meets people's deepest needs and penetrates their worldviews. Jesus himself spoke to people from where they were. He adapted to the nature of their cultural context. He had a different approach to the self-righteous Pharisees than he did to the skeptics and that he did to the people who knew they were sick and broken. He had a different approach. When he told his stories, during his teachings, he contextualized the elements of his stories and parables. For instance, he referred to himself as the bread of life. He knew that they understood the importance of bread. They lived on bread. Now, if Jesus had been speaking, say, in Japan or China, he might have said, I am the rice of life. So he contextualized. There may be a short distance from our mouth to their ears, but that short distance can have a huge cultural gap. When I was preparing for this session, I was reminded of a book I read many years ago called Peace Child. This is, if anybody wants to borrow it, this is an amazing book, by Don Richardson. So he and his wife Carol were missionaries to a village in New Guinea back in the 1970s, to a very remote people group. And these people needed the good news that we need. Don and Carol struggle. They struggle with the language. Judy knows all about this. She works for Wycliffe. But they struggle. There wasn't a written language at that time for this culture. And they struggled to learn some of the language and culture. And they finally got to a place in their language fluency to where they thought they could tell the good news of Jesus. But they told the story, and they were shocked at the response. Unbeknownst to them, the highest virtue in this culture was skillful treachery. They sounded like the people of Crete, don't they? So when they got to the part in the story about Judas betraying Jesus, the village went wild with admiration and celebration for the hero Judas. So they had told the story of Jesus, but the cultural context of the listeners meant that they had not yet communicated the gospel. The people did not understand the good news. Don and Carol asked God to help them find a way to help the people understand, and it eventually came. So the various tribes in near proximity had a long-standing, fiercely violent rivalry that went as far back as anyone could remember. They kidnapped and murdered back and forth, and if they could do it through treachery, like befriending them and then turning on them, that was even better. And a lot of this ended in cannibalism. So finally, the death and violence got to a point so bad that Don Richardson said, Carol and I will need to leave unless the tribes can make peace. And they didn't want them to leave. They brought medical supplies, they brought metal tools and things like that. Okay, so this is when they learned that there was a sacred rule among the tribes that allowed a tribal chief to pay the price for peace. The Richardsons watched in awe as in a ceremony. The chief took his own baby son and placed him in the arms of his adversary. And that child would live with the enemy tribe for the rest of his life. And as long as he lived, there would be peace between the tribes. The child was called the Peace Child. And it was the only way to make peace. And that became their gospel hook that the Richardsons could use to communicate the gospel. They retold the story of the gospel, and it was now understood. We were enemies of God, and there was no hope of peace. And until God sent his peace child Jesus to live here with us, when they heard about the peace child and then his death at the hands of Judas, it outraged them because it was a horrible violation of the sacred rule. The peace would now be broken again, but God brought the peace child back to life. And Jesus' forever life means we have forever peace with God. That entire culture came to accept the good news of the peace child Jesus. So this is a remarkable story that demonstrates in a big way the importance of cultural context. We won't usually face ones that are this big, but it's the importance of cultural context and considering how we communicate. We see this with the Apostle Paul. He took one approach with biblically literate Jews. It says in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul says, to the Jews I became as a Jew. Well, he was a Jew, but that was no longer his main identity. And then he took another approach with pagan Greeks. It says, to those outside of the law, I became as one outside of the law. And the verse goes on to say it was for the sake of the gospel. He aimed to break down barriers that might make it harder for someone to come to accept the good news. There's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to communicating. That's why we contextualize. That's why contextualizing is important when communicating ideas and truths. Put it into the context that they can relate to, into the context that they are living in, and in the communication, and the communication becomes much more effective. And Amy related this in her story, her fun story. So just in the Portland area, you know about the 4 quadrants, right? North, west, southwest, northeast, southeast. I mean, when you hear that, it kind of brings different things to mind. They have different flavors, different contexts. Even neighborhood to neighborhood, we can have different microcultures where contextualized communication will be more effective. Now, contextualizing doesn't mean that if the community around you has tattoos that you need to get a tattoo. But you do need to recognize that as part of the culture and to see the beauty in their tattoos and ask the story behind them. Relate to it. Like Amy said in the last section, we need to get really comfortable asking questions and truly listening to their answers, watching for those cues and those echoes. If we don't know where people are coming from, our attempts to shower them with our message may not only be unproductive, it may actually be counterproductive, reinforcing their misconceptions, hardening them to the gospel that they so need. So before you share your faith booklet, the author says, our privilege as gospel communicators is showing non-believers how their deepest longings and hopes are resolved in Jesus Christ. But this takes time, and it takes alertness, and it takes prayer to get there. Pray first. So after getting insight into their context, we need to pray for understanding of how to get to the conversations, the gospel conversations. So in Samuel Chan's book, Evangelism in a Skeptical World, which has been referenced several times already today, it's on that back table. He says, being told to go share your faith without being equipped with tools and understanding is like some poor soul in the swimming pool being yelled at to swim, and he doesn't know how. It's just not helpful. It's not motivating. In my own experience with sharing my faith was like that early on in the youth group. We were told to go to the mall. We just got dropped off at the mall with gospel tracts, and we were told to go find somebody who was sitting by themselves and share the gospel tract with them. Needless to say, it was terrifying. And I don't know if there was any fruit from that, but we did what we were told to do, but it was terrifying. In Chan's book, he offers some strategies that are simple and doable that might empower us normal, fearful Christians to get there to those gospel conversations. So one of the strategies that really stood out to me is this. It's the first one on your thing. Get your Christian friends to be friends with your non-Christian friends. Strategy 1. But before I go into this strategy, I want to tell you a story about last weekend. Scott and I were at the cabin. We have a cabin up at, near Mount St. Helens, and it looks into the National Forest. We don't have a sweeping view like this, but we look into the forest on our back deck. And we were just sitting out there. We were just sitting out there enjoying the evening, and we saw some movement in the trees, in the undergrowth there, and it was kind of strange. And we heard a little bit of movement. And then out walks this creature, and it was Sasquatch. And he was so big. And, I mean, he was kind of near the edge of the trees, and we were making eye contact. I mean, he was looking at us, we were looking at him, and then he goes like this, come with me. I mean, he just motions. So Scott, of course, gets up and just heads out after him. And I was a little more reluctant, but I did it too. So we followed. And eventually we came to this kind of crack in the side of the cliff there, and he slipped in. And Scott slipped in, and then I slipped in, and it just opened up into a big cave, and he fed us mushrooms and berries, and then he waved us away. And so we just left and were lost, but we eventually found our way back to our cabin. Do you believe me? Okay, well, here's another story I want to tell you. Okay, here's another story. 2,000 years ago, God sent his son Jesus to the earth. He was 100% God and 100% man, and he was born of a virgin. While he was on earth, he healed sick people, he raised people from the dead, and then he was arrested and crucified and died on a Roman cross. But he didn't stay dead. He rose again from the dead, alive, and then he went up to heaven. People saw him rise up into heaven. And if you believe this, God will forgive you of all your sins. And if you trust him, his Holy Spirit lives in you. When you die, your soul will leave your body and go live in heaven with him. And your body will, and then one day Jesus is going to return to earth and set up a kingdom, and your body will rise from the dead and be reunited with your soul, and you will live in his kingdom forever. Okay, so if you're not a believer, not a Christian, the second story sounds just as unbelievable as my first story. Maybe even less believable, because we are in the Northwest after all. So why believe one and not the other? Here's why. We humans are all programmed with plausibility structures. It's on your page there. So plausibility structures are accepted beliefs, convictions, and understandings that either greenlight truth claims as plausible or red light truth claims as implausible. So plausibility structures impress upon us that something is either believable or not believable. So in the first story, when I said, out walked Sasquatch, immediately red light flashes. False, that's implausible. And you got those red flashing lights all the way through my story. I mean, the back porch looking at the forest was one thing, but then it got red lighted. Okay, but then when I said Jesus was born of a virgin, your plausibility structure just green lighted it as believable. This fits with what you believe and what people you know and trust believe. So we're not talking about the truthness of the claims right now. Both stories might be true, but we're talking about the believability of it. So where do we get our plausibility structures? Well, they come from three sources. They come from experience, they come from facts, data, and evidence, and they come from community. Studies show that the source that is most influential in our plausibility structures, more often than not, is community. Now, right now, most of us don't belong in a community of people who have seen Sasquatch. But we do belong in a community of trusted friends and family who believe in Jesus and have had an experience with Jesus. Our community, our trusted friends and family, has a powerful role in forming our beliefs. Our community also shapes how we interpret our experiences and how we interpret the data and evidence that we hear. Now, if after I told you the Sasquatch story, about 15 of you chimed in to my story with, I can't believe, this happened to me too. I mean, if that happened here, okay, that'd be crazy, right? But if it happened, then suddenly my story becomes a little more believable. And your plausibility structure might shift as you get an inkling that perhaps there might be some truth to this. So here's the key idea. People will find a story more believable if their community, their trusted friends and family, also believe the story. So we need to merge our worlds. We need to get our Christian friends to be friends with our non-Christian friends. Find activities or create activities, that's a fill in the blank too. Find activities or create activities where you can make that happen to merge your worlds. Now, hospitality comes in huge here. Hospitality was a big part of the early church. There's a book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key, and the author says hospitality is not like the conjured up scene of a Victorian tea, but hospitality is practical, unfussy, and constant, and it creates an intimacy among people that allows for genuine differences to be discussed. So by sharing our homes or our yards or whatever with both our non-Christian friends and our Christian friends together, our non-Christian friends will get to eat with and know more and more Christian friends. And maybe, just maybe, begin to adopt the Christian friends' plausibility structures. Now, this is not a gimmick. It's not a gimmick. It's a strategy based on the way we as humans operate. I want to share with you an example of my experience with this. This is a true story. I'll just preface that. Okay. I live on Clackamas River Drive, and as most people know, it's not exactly like a neighborhood. There's not sidewalks. People aren't walking by with their dog. I had been wanting to connect with the ladies on my road, and without connection, there's not much opportunity for making gospel connection. So I wanted to connect. I knew that there was a lot of interest in gardening in my neighborhood, and I thought that doing something with that to connect was a good idea, some kind of garden topic thing. So I was telling this to Amy, and she offered to come alongside me, and we brainstormed on what it would look like. The plan came up. It was for me to do some kind of a gathering in my backyard for 4 consecutive Monday evenings, right at magic hour, golden hour, and we would have charcuterie and beverages, and we would make it fun, swap table and a drawing and a mixer game, kind of like this one we had, and then I would give a little talk on gardening, and then maybe parallel it with a little life lesson that parallel that. Okay, so I made a flyer, and Scott and I drove up and down Clackamas River Drive, and we put it in the mailboxes along my road. I had no idea what kind of response I was going to get. So, but I did have Amy, and Andy was going to be there, and Lisa Hartung, where'd she go? Okay, she was there, and who understood, these three that understood the importance of connecting with neighbors. And so 8 neighbors showed up. And they were all so thankful. This was in 2022. They were all so thankful for the opportunity to engage with one another. It was right after the COVID shutdowns and everything. So I did mention in my talks that I was a person of faith, and I just left it at that point. 2 of them asked me about that afterwards, that first night. But from this garden series, I was able to get a database of contact info of my neighbors and could plan the next gathering. So the invite for the next gathering was through the email from the database. And I invited that group of ladies, which I call my garden ladies, and their husbands, and they all came. So this planned effort has given a sense of community to this group and has given me an opportunity to look for ways to love them and to share the gospel. So I'm looking for those ways. So a couple of months later, one of the neighbors, her name's Ellen, she hosted 3 of the couples to dinner at one point. And at one point, the 4 of us women were sitting and chatting, and one of them, her name's Rachel, she opened up about her daughter looking into religions. And so then Ellen chimes in with her Jewish heritage, and then I chimed in with my faith in Jesus Christ. It was a light conversation, but it's just the right time. Rachel also mentioned to me that night that she had seen Amy and her husband around town, or she and her husband, Amy and her husband had seen Amy and Alex around town at restaurants several times. And I said the 3 of us should get together. And so we eventually, the 3 of us got together and went out to eat. And that night, the conversation just quickly turned to spiritual, driven mostly, by curiosity on Rachel's part. She wanted to know about our beliefs. And she's thinking about her daughter, was exploring these religions. And at one point, she was explaining some of her beliefs. And she said that she was an atheist. And Amy and I both looked at each other after she had explained what she was thinking. And we both looked at each other. And then Rachel's like, what? And so we both said, no, we don't think you're an atheist. We think you're an agnostic. And she thought she was just eager to hear all about that. And it was fun, and we were laughing, and it was just good conversation all around. And a number of other engagement opportunities have come as a trickle down from that first invite to the garden thing. But it's the spiritual conversations that we're hoping and praying to get to. We're not just doing this for fun. It's just, we do want to get there because we want to glorify God, and we love God, and we want them to know God loves them. So we want to get to those spiritual conversations. So creating events or opportunities to have your worlds merge is a great strategy. The strategy of merging our worlds was one of the premises that prompted our Connection Cafe in the spring. And we're hoping to do that again this coming spring. Okay, another strategy 2 in Chan's book, it's called the Coffee, Dinner, Gospel Sequence. It's another strategy for creating opportunity for gospel conversation. This strategy in a nutshell is that you invite someone for coffee a few times, then invite them to dinner, and then organically and naturally, deeper conversations will begin to occur, cultivating ground for gospel conversation. And I'm seeing this with my garden ladies. So why is this effective? Okay, bear with me for a minute. This involves a little bit of philosophy. Okay, in the 1700s, there was a German philosopher named Immanuel Kant, and he divided what we know into 2 realms of knowledge: the realm of data and the realm of values, what we know. So data is the realm of facts, evidence, data. Statements like 1 + 1 is 2. The sky is blue. Water boils at 212 degrees. Data, facts. And then this realm of knowledge, if it's brought up in a conversation, it won't usually cause arguments. Now, the other realm, values, is that realm of God, ethics, values. Statements like, there is a God, lying is wrong, capitalism is better than socialism. These are the kind of things that if they're brought up in conversation will probably lead to arguments, depending on what kind of group you're in. So in the Western world, this values data divide that Kant identified has led to another divide, the sacred secular divide. Basically, in our culture, sacred statements and conversations, because they are in the values realm, God, ethics, and values, are expected to only be discussed in private space, whereas secular statements can be discussed anywhere. Some countries where it's illegal to share your faith are referred to as closed countries, and in the U.S., we're not a closed country. We have become like a closed country because even though it's not illegal to share our faith, it's not culturally acceptable to bring your sacred into the public setting. So, like missionaries in closed countries, we work toward getting to the values realm with the people in our community, where it's acceptable to talk about God, ethics, and values. We aim to move from the public setting to the private setting, where it's more acceptable to enter the values realm. So in this coffee, dinner, gospel sequence, the conversations usually start with interests. Books you like, sports teams, movies, things like that. So that's where it starts. Then if a person feels safe with you, they might give hints that they want to move on to the next layer, to values, maybe school choices, political views, healthcare, gun ownership, and then finally to the layer of worldview, which is God, life, death, spirituality. So as we progress through this sequence, we need to keep in mind the importance of being good listeners. Amy sequenced through that with her Greek Orthodox friend and got to the different layers as she moved through. It wasn't coffee at dinner, but it was kind of that sequence. Okay. So we don't want to miss the opportunity. We need to keep in mind the importance of being good listeners. We don't want to miss opportunities. Be alert to what people are saying and learn to ask questions that transition from one layer of the conversation to the next. Around 2002, we had gotten to know several of our neighbors, and one evening we merged our worlds. We had our next door neighbors over, and we invited some church friends, a couple from church, one of whom had had a number of knee surgeries. At one point, Norm, my non-Christian neighbor, said to my knee surgery scarred friend from church, he said, "That's an impressive scar." And it so struck me as such a bold yet inviting statement that really was more like a question and an invitation for my church friend to tell the story of his scar. I have used that statement so many times. Well, that's an impressive scar, but that's an impressive tattoo. That's an impressive backpack. These are statements like this. It invites them to tell you their story, which leads to another strategy. Listen to their story, and Amy has covered this strategy, but I want to add a little bit. If they do move into the realm where they begin to share their story, let them run with it. Chan says, the aim here is to listen, understand, and empathize. Don't try to interrupt. Don't think of how you can interact with their position. Don't assume you know what their faith or religion does or believes. Instead, ask as many questions as possible so that you hear properly what they're saying. Listen as much as possible so that you can understand their faith. And try to feel what they're feeling. See the world from their point of view. And if they say I'm Buddhist, be genuinely interested and ask questions like, how did you become Buddhist? Did you grow up in a Buddhist family? How do you pray? How do you worship? What does that look like? If you get this far, where they're telling you their story, then you are usually on safe ground to tell your story. The fourth strategy is to tell our story as a story, and Amy also covered this in the last section. One of one other book I wanted to mention that I really like. It's called So What's the Difference? It's a book that looks at 20 worldviews, faiths, and religions and how they compare to Christianity. It tells what we have in common with them and what's very different about our religions. But I would recommend that book. So far we've talked about checking our context and ways to be attentive to those around us and strategies to get to the place of opportunities for gospel conversation. So now I want to pivot to the topic of loving the lost, loving our neighbors, loving the people around us who do not yet have a restored relationship with God through faith in Jesus Christ. In Before You Share Your Faith book, the author contends that rather than the presence of fear being the main obstacle, and it is indeed an obstacle, and Marcia will address this in the next session, so rather than the presence of fear being the main obstacle, it is the absence of love. He says, if I love someone enough, I will overcome my fear and share Christ with them. If I don't, I won't. He says we must consider the role of love before the challenge of fear. In 1 John 4:18, John writes, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. The idea is that God's great love for us, which was demonstrated by what he did for us, casts out fear of judgment. And this becomes a motivator to love others. The next verse says, we love because he first loved us. But Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. Out of his great love, he came. How did he love when he was here? He became friends with sinners and tax collectors. He formed relationships. He touched people. He saw people where they were. So let's talk about loving our neighbors. I mean, have you really asked yourself, do I really love the people around me that I live near, that I work with, that I cross paths with, that I know need Jesus? Do I genuinely love them? We want to avoid approaching relationships with tunnel vision to get them saved. Making the goal of sharing your faith a box to be checked rather than a person to be loved. Bob Goff, in his book, Love Does, says, if you love people with an agenda, they become a project. And really, most people can smell that from a mile away. Sharing your faith is not manipulation, and it's not a sales pitch. Yes, we want them to know Jesus, but we don't want to fake an I want to get to know you vibe. What people want, they want love that is authentic and is available. At George Fox University, where's Lane? Yeah, they have a brand promise, right, Lane? Yeah, and this is it. This is their brand promise to the students, which is, it's this: you will be known. This is what it says on their website. It's the hope each student brings to the college experience, to be known by name, to be understood, valued, and encouraged. At George Fox, to be known means that professors and staff connect with students in authentic ways, personally, academically, spiritually, recognizing that we all come to this place with different backgrounds, life experiences, and dreams for the future. To be known means the students not only learn new ideas, but they also share their own. To be known means to be heard. And that's why we begin with a simple promise, that each student will be known. What a great promise. What a great promise. What a valuable context to a relationship. What a way to love. So in your personal community of people, your neighbors, your extended family, your coworkers, I'm sure there are some people that are very different from you. Some of them you've avoided. Some may even creep you out. We certainly don't have to cross the ocean like the Richardsons did in Peace Child to find people who are vastly different from us. We may just have to walk across the street. It's critical to loving them is to treat every human being with dignity and respect, remembering that each person is a special creation designed in the image of God. I'm going to repeat that. Critical to loving them is to treat every human being with dignity and respect, remembering that each person is a special creation designed in the image of God. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. I think it's on your notes. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and so on. So keeping the mindset that this is a person like me who has been made in God's image and that struggles as a human, that will help us get to the point of authentic love. Become a participant in their pain, share experiences together. Small things add up. It doesn't have to be anything big. And ask questions like, how can I help you? Or what's it like to be you right now? Or can I pray for, and name something. Challenge yourself to engage some of the people that you've avoided. I want to close my session with a personal story. Many of you know that I love thrift store shopping. And about 15 years ago, I was at my favorite store, and I noticed a person that was there every time I was there. And I wasn't there like 24/7, but she was there no matter when I went. And she had a somewhat very brusque demeanor. And I could tell that a lot of customers just thought it best to stay out of her way. She seemed to be about my age, and there was something about her that really piqued my curiosity. And it made me want to know her, to break through the barriers. At first, it was just kind of a nod here, a nod there, a little smile, a short, fun comment. And she seemed to like that I didn't seem scared of her. And over that year, we gradually began to know a little bit about each other, about each other's children. We talked about regulars in the store. Then things picked up. We became friends. Over the following years, Jen and I have shared each other's pain with the loss of a parent, the death of key friends, the death of a lonely old man who was in the store every day. We've shared resources and tips, but it was at one evening when I had her over for a drink at Magic Hour that we got to a gospel conversation. And she shared how deeply hurt she was by how she was treated by some religious people that apparently were legalistic and lacking grace for this dear person who had insecurities and has had trauma, just like the rest of us. The journey's ongoing. I deeply love her, and I so want her to come to know his deep love for her. She's on the top of my list. So as we move into the refresh section, you'll be doing 4 things at your tables. Let's begin firstly by meditating on a passage from 1 John. So you'll see there's a passage that says, as we grow in the knowledge of God and our love for him, we will increase in our love for others. So spend a few minutes reading and meditating on this passage, as well as taking time to pray for genuine love for your loss to deepen. And I'll prompt you when it's time to move to the next thing. Just take a few minutes. Okay. Secondly, we're going to look at the Bless app. How many of you have the Bless app? Are you using it? And yeah, okay. What it is, it's an app that you can download to your phone. The acronym stands for Begin with Prayer, Listen, Eat, Serve, Story. Okay, so each day you're sent a specific prayer to pray for 5 of your neighbors by name. So you are given a map, you're given 40 people that are in proximity to you with their name and address, and every day you get 5 of those, and the next day you get the next 5, and it prompts you with a beautiful prayer to pray for them. Just praying that for them. Even if you haven't met them yet, but you just don't know what's going to come, pray first. And so you have the QR code right there. If you haven't done it yet, I would encourage you to do that. You can do it and sign up. But if you can't do it right now, I think we might be running short on time. There is a prayer right there that I took from one of the days last week that I want you to pray for your neighbors right now. So let's do that for a few minutes. So as you continue prayerfully, I want you to come up with your list. Who in your life needs the good news of Jesus? Jen's at the top of my list. So if you just think of 3, 4, or 5 people, write them down. Okay, for our final exercise, I would like for you to begin to try to create an event that merges your worlds, where you can get your Christian friends and your non-Christian friends together. I remember it was years ago at New Life. We did this thing called the festival in the summer, and we were encouraged to create an event that we would want to invite our neighbors to. And I mean, people got really creative. I did. Lori and I think a couple other ladies, we created an eBay seminar that we invited people to, and we taught them how to do eBay. And it was just a fun time, and we made some good connections. But this is what I'm talking about is merging your worlds. Remember the plausibility structures? So I think someone did like a volleyball meet. The OC Church is doing a great job with their cider parties, their neighborhood parties, to merge their worlds and love on people, make great connections, make friends, and get your Christian friends to be friends with your non-Christian friends. So I want you to just take a few minutes. We don't have much time left here, but create an event that could merge your Christian and non-Christian worlds. You may want to plan with someone at your table. It was great for me to be able to plan with Amy back in 2022 and just think of, okay, who do you want to be there? What would it look like? What would make it fun? What would make people connect? And just kind of just do some brainstorming on that. So for the remainder of our time for this refresh session, that's what I want you to work on.